Hi everyone, and welcome back to season 3 of Commerce Meets Law, a podcast we talk about various commercial topics and how they interact with the legal profession. This week, I had the pleasure of speaking to Rupesh Shah, a legal recruitment consultant with over a decade of experience specializing in the London private practice market. Rupesh founded his own legal recruitment agency in 2015, RS Legal Search Limited, opening doors for top lawyers to join world-class teams. Prior to entering the world of law, Rupesh spent 4 years as a derivatives trader after studying maths and statistics at the London School of Economics. In this episode, we discuss Rupesh's career in finance and why he decided to pivot into the legal profession, what the role of a legal recruitment consultant actually involves, as well as the most challenging and rewarding aspects of the role, and finally, the trends of lawyers moving law firms post qualification, the reasons why lawyers do decide to move, and what steps Rupesh advises them to take before moving to another firm. This conversation is aimed at any professional considering a career change, no matter how big or small, and whether it is within or outside the legal profession. Rupesh's knowledge and advice was super concise and super clear, and I'm sure will be truly invaluable to everyone listening. Just a quick request before we get into the episode. I'd really appreciate if you could just give the podcast a follow and a rating on Spotify. It really helps other people find us. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy this conversation and I'll see you right at the end.
Hi, Rupesh, and welcome to Commerce Meets Law. Really excited to chat to you today about all things legal and all things recruitment. So, we always have a bit of an icebreaker on the podcast, and the question is, in your opinion, what is your superpower?
Hi, Shreya. Nice to meet you. And yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, my superpower, I guess it's a boring one. I think it's the fact that I'm super organized. I feel like that served me well in recruitment and in my personal life. I feel like being someone that doesn't like to let anything slip through the cracks or sort of let anything go by the wayside. I think that served me well. But as boring as it is, I feel like that's probably my superpower. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a great one to have. I feel like in this day and age when everyone's sort of managing so many things all at the same time, organization is definitely key. And just taking a couple of steps back before we talk about what you're doing right now, growing up, what were sort of your main interests, passions, and what did you think that your career would end up being?
So I think my main interests and passions growing up and sort of even to this day are probably centered around sports. So
Mhm.
when I was growing up, I always loved playing sports and I still do. I tried everything sort of under the sun, whether it's football, tennis, volleyball, basketball at university and earlier. And I've kept a couple of those on as I've got older. And I think that was always my passion. And sort of competitive sport, I think is really what I like. So whether that's competing in a tennis tournament or whether that's competing in a volleyball tournament, that's what I like to do to this day as well.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to see how sort of sports and those hobbies also play a role. Did you feel like at that point that you wanted sort of a traditional career, or did a career in the arts or the sports feel more appealing?
No, that was always a hobby for me. I think it was always a way of making fitness fun. I never liked running on a treadmill, but I liked competitive sports. But I never thought about it as a career. For me, it was always about maybe using like maths or using like something that I enjoyed academically as a career. But yeah, sports was always a hobby for me for sure.
Definitely. And talking a little bit about the career you ended up going into the world of finance and derivatives. So could you tell us a little bit about what that sort of world looked like and, what a day in your life looked like as a derivatives trader?
Yeah, so coming out of LSE, I think, I was in a group of people that wanted to go into finance. A lot of people that studied economics or maths or statistics wanted to go into the banking world. It was the hot trend and it still is, trying to make money, buy fast cars, that kind of thing when you're younger. Um, and yeah, I ended up getting a graduate role with Lehman Brothers and working a summer internship there and getting a graduate role there. Um, and yeah, I suppose I just immersed myself into that world after graduation and spent about 4 years trading or doing trade support when I started off. And I suppose to answer your question, a day in the life was waking up super early, getting on the train when it was still dark, getting to the desk before the markets opened, looking at all the news and waiting for the markets to open, and then sort of trading throughout the day, and then finishing up with some drinks with colleagues or friends. And it was a very fast-paced environment, which was at that time, when you're young, it's quite easy to kind of manage. And I loved it at the time. At the start, it was really great. Being immersed in that world was a nice experience for sure.
And I guess, like you said, it's still a career that a lot of people want to go into, regardless of whether you're studying a degree like statistics or economics, or if you're studying other degrees as well. If you could sort of go back, is that still the way that you would start your career, or do you think that you may have started with perhaps something that was slightly more slower paced?
I think I wouldn't go back and change anything, although things might not have panned out the way I wanted them to. I think life throws experiences your way, and you have to learn along the way. But I think the one thing I probably would have decided more, looked into more, was I went into trading. I went into finance because I liked maths. Now,
Mm.
when you work in the finance world, when you work at Lehman Brothers or any kind of bank or any kind of trading house, you're not really using maths. You're using more kind of news analytics. You're using kind of sales skills. You're using kind of speed and awareness. You're using sort of more sort of broader economic,
Mm.
statistical sort of knowledge. So I think when people say, "Oh, they like science, I want to become a doctor," or "I like maths, I want to become a trader," I think you're not going to be using maths on your day-to-day basis, or you're not going to, potentially be doing what you love on a day-to-day basis. Your career ends up being something else. So I think if I was to go back, I would really look into what my day-to-day would look like, and if I would enjoy doing that. But I wouldn't change my experience in that respect.
Yeah, definitely. That's such an important point. I think, like you rightly say, what we think, or what we enjoy at school, or what we think our competencies are, we kind of align that and think that the job that we end up going into is going to be the exact same. And so many times there's so many other variables and factors you have to consider, and I think that ends up being that sometimes our education and our career are two very, very different things.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, about 4 years in, you decide to enter the world of law. So how does that transition come in, and what were you kind of thinking about at the time?
So I was a graduate in 2007, which was pretty much the worst time to be in
Mm.
finance. Obviously, after I left Lehman Brothers, a year after I left, that they went bankrupt. Um, it was 4 years of trying to manage myself and really trying to make a career out of a difficult situation, because the finance world was just in turmoil. And as a new person in the industry, or any graduate, it was difficult to kind of survive that kind of market, because you just had no one had experienced it before, to that extent. And being new, you just don't know what to expect. And senior traders or senior managers were just worried about their own jobs and worried about their own sort of positions and things like that. They didn't have time to sort of mentor the juniors and the graduates. So it was mostly about survival. So I lasted about 4 years and I got as much experience as possible. But towards the end of that, I realized how volatile it was and how stressful it was and how difficult it would be to carve a career out in the banking world. And I took some time off to decide what I really wanted to do. And I think if you speak to any recruiter, they're going to say recruitment wasn't their passion growing up. They didn't grow up thinking, I want to become a recruiter, or they didn't go through university thinking, I wanted to become a recruiter. You kind of find yourself being a recruiter because that's kind of makes sense at the time. And so I researched it and I joined a small company just to sort of get some background into what recruitment was, to learn the industry. And then I spent a little while with a couple of friends at that time. We set up a legal recruitment boutique. They were both ex legal recruiters and lawyers, and we managed to do that for a couple of years, and then we all sort of went our separate ways. And then that's when the real journey started for me, when I branched out on my own, not being a lawyer, not being a recruiter for very long. I had to sort of learn the ins and outs of things, and sort of had to learn through my mistakes and learn along the way. But yeah, to answer your question, ending up in law and ending up in legal recruitment wasn't like, you know, something I was passionate about or decided to do, but I've made a career out of it and I really enjoy it. And I think law is one of those things in terms of recruitment where it's kind of recession proof. When I sort of left banking, there was no banking jobs. Otherwise, it would have made sense to become a banking recruiter because I knew the industry inside out, but there was just no jobs. So I think it's very much driven by the economy in that sense. Whereas with law, whether there's a recession or a boom, you know, there's always need for a sort of disputes lawyer or corporate lawyer or tax lawyer. So I felt like it would be quite a recession proof career, and bar COVID where everything was kind of different. You know, it's been a good career over the last 10 years. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think that difference is really interesting. Like you say, it may be that different departments inside a law firm are doing better or worse at different points, but there's always need for law in some area, regardless of what part of the economic cycle we're in. And I guess speaking about recruitment, when a student is sort of hearing that, they're thinking, well, how I enter a law firm is I either do their VAC scheme or I do an internship and I sort of get a role. So at what point do you sort of come in as a legal recruiter, and at what stage do you help a lawyer kind of go into a different job or change their career path?
So when I first started legal recruitment about 10 years ago, it was mainly sort of junior, mid-level and senior level. So sort of 1, 2
Mm.
PQE up to sort of 6, 7, 8 PQE associates that I was helping. And that was after they sort of had a training contract. They mostly stayed with their firm. And then after a couple of years decided they wanted a change of pace or a change of firm or a change of the type of law they were doing in terms of the intricacies of it. But over the last, I'd say 5, 6, 7 years, or maybe even it's got more and more over the last few years. At the NQ sort of juncture, that's become a real sort of turning point for where people decide what they want to do with their career. And I think retention rates at law firms in terms of trainee to NQ qualification have gone down over the years generally at firms because more and more trainees are looking at what their qualification options are at NQ level. And that's mostly driven by the US firms that have come into London or have been in London and become more established over the last 5 to 10 years. And they're generally, if they have their own training contract or not, they're looking to supplement their teams with NQ lawyers, you know, in the main sort of transactional areas. Whether it's private equity funds, leverage finance. So more and more, I've been doing a lot of that type of work as well, helping sort of trainees in their path to qualification and deciding what options they have. And I think that's been the evolution of legal recruitment. So I often get people messaging me asking for advice on how I can help them with a paralegal job or get a training contract. And unfortunately, as my expertise is always sort of NQ and beyond, I think at that level, a bit more junior, not many firms will use recruiters to find their trainees or sort of paralegals because they have a lot of people applying directly or they can source directly. So my main expertise is sort of NQ and above.
Yeah, and I think thanks for putting that into perspective. I think that's really helpful for people to hear as well, because like you say, at that stage, law firms, especially the top ones, probably have thousands and thousands of applications, and so it's really after that sort of NQ stage that I guess people like you are the legal recruiters will come in. So just to help break that down a little bit further, if let's say that I have joined a firm, I've qualified, and now I'm maybe considering, you know, if there are better options for me out there in terms of sort of growth opportunities, pay, all of that sort of stuff. What process do you take me through in order to decide where I should move and if this is the right time?
So firstly, it's about deciding what area of law you want to qualify into. I think that's really important because some people see, you know, like a funds role at a US firm and think, oh, wow, I want to get 180K as an NQ salary. But do you
Yeah.
want to be a funds lawyer? Do you want to do that? What kind of law do you want to do? Because law is a long career and you don't want to be doing something that just for the money or just for the firm or just for that type of thing. So the first thing I always advise is what area of law are you most passionate about? So over the seats that you've done so far or over the sort of courses you've taken whilst studying, what were you passionate about? Was it disputes? Was it competition? Was it, leverage finance? What are you passionate about? So firstly, I asked that. And then secondly, I sort of navigate through what the options might be for them. And like I said, if it's a transactional role, like a private equity role or leverage finance role, then there'll probably be a few US firms that will be recruiting. But generally, the recruitment cycle is quite early. So actually, now firms are already starting to recruit for March 25 NQs, and they even started a little while ago. So this is well before people are even in their fourth seat. So they've just done 2.5 or maybe 3 seats worth of training, and they're having to decide what they want to be as a lawyer, what area they want to qualify into. So it's about sort of discussing and talking with someone about what area they're really interested in and where they see themselves going. That's always my first port of call.
And I guess once you've sort of decided that, it's a particular area that you're looking at, in terms of choosing the firm and choosing the area, how does that sort of work? And who do you encourage that they talk to alongside you and maybe other recruiters in order to make that decision?
So most trainees or finance trainees that I speak to they're either in 2 camps. They either know that they definitely want to move and they want to move to, say, a US firm to do a particular type of work, or they're sort of not sure about their options because retention rates have been a bit low recently, and they won't find out till maybe November, December what team they're going to be put in. So they want to have a role secured way before then, before the market becomes really competitive with loads of sort of people looking for NQ jobs. So the people I advise trainees to speak to are everyone in their cohort above that they knew, or a couple of cohorts above. So the people that just qualified or qualified a year ago, they may have made friends with those people, and see what they did and see what advice they could give in terms of what they did in their situation. Also speaking to any other friends at any other firms to see what's happening at their firm and what it's looking like in terms of qualification, and just sitting down and having a coffee with their line managers for their last couple of seats, just to get an overview of what they feel like their position is. So partners will never say, yeah, look, or they might say in some instances, but very rarely will they say, yeah, look, we want you back. You're definitely guaranteed a role with us. But at least sitting down and having a coffee with them to see if there's a chance, they're looking to take on 2 people, 1 person, what their chances are of being offered a position in that team, and then making a decision based on that. Because some people, like I said, if you know that you want to move to another firm upon qualification, and especially to a US firm, then you go sort of all guns blazing, and you can apply to the firms that are recruiting. But some people are still not sure, and it's okay not to be sure, because you're still sort of third seat trainee or final seat trainee. So keeping all your options open and speaking to your line manager, speaking to the people in the cohort above, speaking to friends at other firms, and then making a decision based on that. I think that's the best plan of action.
Yeah. And if, someone does come to you and they say, oh, maybe I'm considering this, I might want to go to a US firm because of certain opportunities, or I see that I want to work with these kind of clients, do this kind of work. What are some fears or concerns that they have? Is it sort of a reputational thing, or is there anything that they're worried about before making that move?
So I'd say there's probably 2 biggest fears. The biggest fear when someone hasn't changed jobs before is this going to get back to my current firm?
Yeah.
Which is a fear I always have to ease, because it's like, they don't want, once they submit their CV or I make an introduction to a firm, they're very scared. A lot of people that, oh, is this going to get back to my partner? Is my firm going to know that I'm looking and I'm not interested in staying here? And I ease that concern. These processes are very confidential. There's probably people in their team right now at the senior level, whether it's senior associates or partners, that are having chats with other firms. It's just the nature of this business. I think, overall, on average, people change jobs in law every 2 to 3 years. So it's probably okay to assume there's probably some people in your team, whether now or in the next 6 months, they're going to be having chats with other firms. So that's definitely one fear I have to ease. Don't worry about that. It's a confidential process. And the other fear I'd say is they don't want to burn bridges. So if if they're looking at a certain firm and they interview, but then they decide it's not the right opportunity for them, they don't want to burn that bridge and say in a year's time or in 2 years' time or in 3 years' time, consider joining that firm again. And again, I ease that concern by saying it's happened plenty of times to me before, or I've seen it plenty of times where someone will interview now for a position. They feel it's not quite right for them, whether it's personally in terms of timing or it just wasn't right for them. But then 6 months' time or 12 months' time or even 2 years' time, they will have joined that firm. So there's definitely no bridges burnt. If you've made a good impression and you're networking with the right people and you're doing it for the right reasons, then there's definitely that option to move further down the line.
For sure. And I think, again, like you say, especially when you first start out and you've sort of got a training contract, you think, oh my God, a firm's even considered me, that's such a big thing. And you think, surely now I can't, sort of go away. But I think, like you say, it's very common. It happens very often. And, people change jobs all the time. And, you're not burning a bridge just because you decided that there's an opportunity for you elsewhere.
And
On that point,
I think there's that transition that needs to be made as well in your mind, because as a trainee or as a VAC scheme student, or when you're applying for VAC schemes or training contracts, you're one of 50 people or one of 30 people applying. So it's kind of like, please hire me, because of these reasons. Whereas when you're an NQ, you're kind of, or applying for an NQ position, it's more of an even playing field. You're still trying to impress and show why you're the best candidate for the job. And there's probably still a lot of people applying for that position. But what people are surprised about, what candidates are surprised about, is the fact that almost to some element, the partners that are interviewing them are convincing them as to why they should join them, as opposed to their competitors, which I feel is a real eye opener for associates as they get more senior. And I think that NQ level is the first transition, and then at 2, 3, 4 PQE, the more senior you become, the more it becomes about partners or the interviewers trying to convince the candidate more than the other way around. So I think it's a nice thing for NQs to experience.
For sure. I think it's a transition that's not often talked about, but I think it's so important because as you do progress further in your career, you're right, you're not one amongst however many ever thousands of people applying, and people do want you there. So it's definitely a more of a two-way street at that stage. We spoke a lot about sort of the NQ, and like you say, that seems to be quite the trend. But talking a little bit more about, I guess, when you're maybe 5, 6 years down the line, does that transition look different about moving different firms, or is it very much sort of the same reasons and the sort of same process of moving to a different place?
So I think broadly speaking, there's a couple of avenues from what I've seen over the last 10 years of when people look. So more recently, it's at NQ level. That's the first sort of junction that people will look at. Then sort of the 1 to 3 year level, when they're trying to transition into the sort of mid-level of associate. And then it's the sort of 5, 6 PQE whereas people are looking towards senior associate and then partnership. I think it becomes the sweet spot is always going to be NQ to 5 PQE or there or thereabouts. And after that, it becomes more of a question of looking towards partnership, and it becomes a very different conversation because it's not about your billables. It's not about sort of what expertise you have in a certain area. It's not about how hard you work or how technically good you are as a lawyer. It becomes more about BD and clients and what revenue you can bring to the firm. So do you have any portability of clients? Do you have any relationships you can leverage to bring to the firm? Because the last thing a firm wants is to hire a 7 PQE associate that's going to be knocking on the door to partnership in the next couple of years, but then they don't have a business case for partnership. So it becomes much more a sort of discussion about business rather than technical legal skills. If you're a lawyer at Magic Circle or US firm for the last 5, 6 years, then they know technically you're good, and you can do the work and you've worked hard and you know the ins and outs of that area of law. But then it becomes more about how you're going to generate business, how you're going to build a book of business. And I think that's the transition that you see, especially at interview stage. And more I've seen that at a more junior level. So even at NQ level, when I'm speaking to firms, and if someone's not successful and I ask for feedback, it's more a case of, technically they were really good, but we can't see them maybe being put in front of clients, or they're not going to be good at business development in a couple of years. Is something that other candidates had that they didn't. So more and more that transition is happening earlier. But I would say at that senior associate level, it's very important.
For sure. And I think that, again, it's one of those things that you don't necessarily get taught at university or those initial stages. You get told you have to be technically good, which of course is important. But in order to stand out, there is that business element, that element of building a brand of yourself as well, and, keeping that reputation to attract those clients. From the people that you have worked with, how do you think people can start doing that even at an early stage? How can they start building a brand around themselves and building that, having that business development so that when they do get to a later stage, they have had those sort of long lasting relationships?
So I think being a lawyer is probably similar to being a recruiter in terms of you need to be able to build relationships and network with people. And it's as much a sales job as it is a technically
Yeah.
driven job where you need to be technically good at the legal side, but you need to have the sales skills, the people skills, the networking skills to really build that business. And I think you can start learning that earlier on. So whether it's going to conferences or going to events and networking with people or I see a lot of strong candidates that have done some public speaking or debating or things like that as hobbies at university or have continued that into their legal career. So I think those softer skills and those kind of networking and sales skills are very important, and it's always important to keep building that. So whether it's being asked to come along to a client meeting or being put on a client call or sort of handle a client earlier on in your career, I think those kind of things can really help. And like I said, going to networking events, going to sort of maybe doing some speaking, maybe doing some sort of know-how or knowledge work or the PSL type work that people do where it is giving training to more junior associates. I think all of those things can help in making the whole round sort of lawyer on top of the technical skills.
For sure. And I think in this day and age, I think we're all, like you said, salespeople. We're all sort of in that way, not, I guess, selling ourselves sounds weird, but in a way, we're all sort of, branding ourselves and thinking about how we can be a brand in ourselves and, do more than just the work, but actually be able to build those professional networks and keep them as well.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, I guess, you've worked in this industry for a long time. What would you say is the most sort of rewarding aspect of your role? And what would you say is probably the most challenging?
So the most rewarding aspect is after working with a candidate for a while, sometimes 6 months, even a year, constantly giving them sort of advice. And then if you're able to successfully help them move to their dream job and you get that call or sort of that recognition from them to say, thank you so much. And, this is the dream role and I'm so happy. I think that is still something to this day after 10 years, which I still love. And obviously as a recruiter, it doesn't happen every day, but when it does happen, you really do hold on to those things and you really feel like you've made a difference in someone's life and really helped them, because a career is, where you spend most of your time. So to really give someone a leg up to that next role, I think that's really rewarding. And I think the most challenging part is the opposite to that, is when someone's been working hard to sort of interview at place, prep for a role, and they've really got sold into the role and they really want to join the firm, but unfortunately they haven't been made an offer, and having to make that call or meet that person for a coffee to let them down and say, look, unfortunately you're not going to be made that offer, and just to see their face drop, and you've become part of the process. You're in a partnership with them to try and help them, and to see their disappointment, and obviously myself, I'm disappointed, but to see it in them is not a nice feeling. So I think that's the ups and downs of it. And yeah, you do see that often.
For sure. I think, as a recruiter in your role, you're probably a part coach, a part therapist all alongside, during that kind of whole journey.
Yeah.
If you kind of looking back, I guess, what are sort of the key skills that you've picked up, that you've developed over your role, that you think is actually very important for lawyers as well and for all professionals?
I think the networking aspect, and I think maintaining relationships. I think being able to, like you say, coach someone and help someone along their journey. I think that's really important. But to answer your question in terms of sort of the transferable skills into law, I think the sales aspect and the networking aspect, it's a people's business being a recruiter, and it's about sort of keeping up to date with people, keeping front of mind with people, and sort of giving them industry insights, keeping them updated in latest trends, whether that's roles, salaries, latest news, that kind of thing, and not only being that coach, but being that person that can provide them value and give them industry insights and give them information about something related to their career. And I think that's very transferable as a lawyer in terms of that networking and maintaining relationships. I think that's a very big part of both careers.
For sure. And like you say, so many industries increasingly, as we have more AI and more tech, the one thing that we can't replace is that human connection, that human input. And I think, building those relationships from, that C to C business and building it between people, I think is so key. Just before we do our rapid fire and sort of finish off the episode, I guess if you could sort of, someone who is considering coming into law but is not currently a law student, or kind of doesn't have is in a different career path, what would you say to them in terms of how they can transition themselves into the legal profession? What sort of things can they do to help them look like a more sort of successful and more kind of viable candidate?
I think it's about going to the networking events, going to the law firm sort of fairs and things like that, and really educating themselves as to the different sides of law, the different types of firms, what people are looking for. I know that a lot of sort of HR and recruitment managers go to these law firm fairs and things like that. So it's about putting yourself out there and really getting as much information as possible, because it is geared towards those kind of students, or that level of person. And I think going and asking lots of questions and asking what your day-to-day would look like, what the best way to apply is, what would look good on my CV, that kind of thing. I think all of those things, it's not only starting the networking thing early on, but it's educating yourself to know whether law is the right career for you. And, majority of the time I see people that haven't done a law degree, but then they transition into law. And I think that's very important when you go to university to do a degree that you're interested in, that subject, whether it's history or English or sciences or whatever it is. Unless you're going to become a doctor or a dentist or something like that, you can pretty much do any degree and then do a conversion for law and most other careers as well. So do something you're interested in, but then when you decide that law is definitely, one of the potential paths you want to take, start going to those careers fairs and start transitioning into that world and really learning more about it. And the VAC schemes, obviously, they're very competitive, but applying to as many different types of firms. I know people that have worked at Magic Circle firms, but they've done VAC schemes at US firms, Silver Circle firms, even smaller firms, just to get an insight into the day-to-day, and all of that experience is very valuable at that stage.
For sure. And I think if there's one thing to take away from this conversation, it's that regardless of what path you're in, conversations and asking questions can get you to that stage. And it's that's where it starts. Of course, there's research and hard work and all those elements, but I think asking those questions is definitely key. So we always end with a rapid fire just to get to know our guests a little bit more. So your first question is, what is the best professional development book that you would recommend to someone who's sort of entering the world of careers?
So professional development books, I love them. I think I'm like someone that's always got a podcast or something on in terms of professional development, or an Audible or something like that going in the car when I'm driving. So I love most of them. The Compound Effect, all of Tim Ferriss's stuff, the Productivity Project. I would say one that I've really enjoyed reading recently was called The Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke. And it's really talking about this whole thing about not just technology, but how dopamine is affecting people, and how being addicted to, whether it's your phone or substances in some people's cases, or whatever it is it's something that really we need to learn about and educate ourselves. And I think that was a really interesting read, and just being able to be more mindful and more present in your day to really just bring your dopamine baseline levels up, to not having to use your phone to get that dopamine hit, or not having loads of coffee or something like that to get that dopamine hit, but just being able to get it from normal day-to-day things. I think as I've got older and my kids have got older, it's nice to just appreciate those little things more rather than looking for those quick fixes of dopamine. So that's been a really interesting book recently I've read.
Yeah, for sure. I'd recommend it too. I think it was such a brilliant read. And like you said, living in the world of notifications and emails and everything popping in all at the same time, all on your phone, I think it's so easy to get lost in that world and forget that you exist in the present world and in the now. So yeah, I think that was such a key one for sure. The next one is, what was your dream job as a kid?
So as a kid, as a young kid, where you have unrealistic dream jobs, I would say my dream job was to be a racing car driver. But then I quickly realized in my adulthood, as a 6'5" stocky lad, that you can't be a racing car driver. You need to be like Lewis Hamilton's build, where you're quite small and you can fit into a car. So that was my dream job when I was growing up as a kid. And then when I transitioned into sort of GCSEs, A levels, university, like I mentioned before, maths was my passion, and that was sort of my dream to do something with maths. But then again, as we've discussed, being a trader, it's not a
Yeah.
mathematician using your math skills. But throughout life, I always saw people in my family, my dad, my uncles, that kind of thing, have their own business. And I feel like for me, I really wanted to run my own business. I felt like that would give me the most sort of
Mm.
satisfaction and sort of degree of making a difference. And I think that having achieved that, I'm very, very fulfilled in that, and I'm quite happy with my current situation.
For sure. And I think you definitely have made a difference and continue to make a difference for so many people. And on that, now that you are a business owner, I guess you can make office rules. But if you could make an office rule and everyone had to follow it for a day, what do you think you'd say?
So I like office rules that are sort of helpful in terms of the personal development stand. And I think as we've talked about the sort of professional development things, I think taking an hour out of your day to just work on yourself, or do something for yourself, is really productive. So whether
Mm.
that's an hour out to lunch with a friend, or an hour in the gym, or an hour just taking a walk in the sunshine if it's sunny outside on a rare occasion, um, or just listening to a podcast or something like that. I think that 1 hour, or even meditation, if people are into that, that 1 hour reset in the middle of the day, I feel is very important. And that's something I do for myself, whether it's just going to gym or going for a walk. And I think that's really important. You can't sit at your desk for so many hours without losing productivity, and getting stressed out. So I feel like
Mm.
that is an office where I would make sure that everyone had that sort of midway reset, throughout the day.
Yeah, I love that. Just a thought on that, actually. I'm not sure if you've been reading about it, but there's been a lot of discussion, obviously, in the UK with the trial of the 4 day work week and just being sort of in the office for 4 days. I guess as a business owner and as someone who's worked in industries like finance and law, what are your thoughts on it? And do you think that people would actually take just a 4 day work week and take 3 days off?
Yeah, so I think I've seen a lot of articles from the Scandinavian countries and things like that, where a lot of
Yeah.
companies have trialed it, and it's been very successful. I think it
Mm.
depends, on what field you work in. I think it's very practical to say, yeah, let's have a 4 day work week, or everyone's mandatory half day off, once a week or something like that. But if you're in an industry where you need to be switched on pretty much 24/7, then it's going to be difficult to do. But obviously, that has its challenges because, um, because you can burn out very quickly. I think
Mm.
in terms of law, if you're a part of a team that's, say, 70 lawyers, then it's very easy to say, okay, one person can have, half a day off per week if you're still getting your work done, or have
Mm.
1 day off per week if you're getting your work done. But if you're in a team of three and you need to be switched on and something needs to be done, then it's not very practical. I think for me, as a recruiter running my own business, I do have to be switched on a lot, but then I can take that half day off if I've got a kid's sports day or something like that,
Yeah.
to make it happen. So I don't have a hard and fast rule every week, but I do try and be very flexible in that respect. But then I might take a call from a candidate on a Sunday evening if that's the only thing that works for them. So I think it's hit and miss, but I think, in terms of the 4 day work week, I think it's been a brilliant innovation. And I think on top of that, I think the working from home culture has really been a
Mm.
silver lining out of COVID. The only kind of good thing that's happened out of COVID has been firms have realized that, people can be productive working from home. And I think now firms are starting to transition back to 5-day working in the office. And I think that's coming up with a bit of resistance. But I think, having that 1 or 2 days working from home, especially as a senior lawyer, I think that really can benefit people from a mental health aspect. But in the finance world, it's not possible. I know that I've got friends that are still traders and things like that. You can't really work from home. You need fast internet connection. You need to be around people that are sharing ideas and things like that. So I think in that kind of world, it doesn't work as well. But it's definitely food for thought.
Definitely, and I think, like you say, it's very interesting, and it's so different depending on the industry you're in, depending on the position you're in, and also depending on sort of what your responsibilities are in terms of whether you have kids, whether you have different caring responsibilities. I think all of those definitely play a role. Speaking of, I guess, taking time off, what are the top 3 travel destinations on your bucket list?
So my life is centered around kids over the last 10 years. So if I was to just say something for myself, I would say I really want to do something that I haven't done before is go shark diving in South Africa. That's something I really want to
Wow.
do because
Hmm.
I love diving. I love anything to do with water sports, that kind of stuff. But that's something I'd really think would be exhilarating. Another thing I'd want to do actually with my kids is to go to Masai Mara in Kenya to do safari. I did it as a kid myself, but I really want to take them there. So that's again on my bucket list to do in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. And I suppose a third one, as a selfish one for myself, would be to go to the festival Tomorrowland in Belgium. It's like one of the biggest house festivals in the world, and someone who's loved going to Ibiza over the years. I think that's something I'd really want to do and enjoy doing. So that's the third one.
That sounds amazing. Those are really unique answers. We haven't yet had them on the podcast, so I think that's food for thought as well, as well as all the productivity discussions we've had. And the final question is, what piece of advice would you give to your 16-year-old self?
To my 16-year-old self, I'd say at that point when you're doing your GCSEs and A levels and things like that around the corner, you're really stressed. Just take a breather, and if you're looking towards your professional life, I would give myself the advice that be adaptable. Things will change along the way. Don't expect that you're going to go down a certain path, a sort of cookie cutter path of, going to university, becoming a trader, and staying at that company for 20 years. Be adaptable. I've had to look for a different career in my time. I've had to change things around depending on circumstance and market and things like that. So I would say any other 16-year-old out there, or giving myself advice if I went back to that stage, is don't worry about hiccups along the way. Be adaptable and just embrace what life throws at you, because it's never going to be how you planned it.
For sure. And with that, Rupesh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was really interesting hearing your take, learning a little bit more about recruitment, I think for myself as well, going into the profession, but also for a lot of people listening, regardless of what stage they're at. So thank you for giving up your time and speaking to us today.
That's great, Cher. Thanks for having me on.
And on that note, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and a massive shout out to Rupesh for coming on the podcast. I'm always trying to reach new audiences and trying to explore new topics within the legal profession. So if you did enjoy the topics that we did cover during this conversation, please do let me know, and do let me know if you want to see similar or sort of similar topics discussed in more depth in the future. You can let me know your thoughts by emailing commercemeetslaw@gmail.com, or you can also DM me on Instagram at commercemeetslaw, and you can also reach out to us on the Commerce Meets Law YouTube channel and our TikTok, also called commerce.meet.law. For now, take care, goodbye, and I'll see you very soon on the next episode.